All right, this is week 12, part 4, our last and final part of lectures this week. We are looking at those pages you had to read from the Lipson and Wixon text talking about IRIs. They first talk more broadly about informal reading inventories in general and then go into specifics about the QRI. So I'm just kind of going to discuss both of those as we wrap up. So first of all, informal reading inventories you should be very familiar with because you've already done some with your first student. They are individually administered reading tests composed of a series of graded word lists, which then help you administer the graded passages. So there are two main purposes. The first is to place students in materials at the appropriate level of instruction, so independent materials, finding instructional materials for the classroom, and then frustrational materials, which you would want to avoid. And then the other main purpose is to help identify the student's strengths and weaknesses in areas of word recognition and comprehension. And I think you've already seen how useful these assessments are in pinpointing specific needs of the students and planning specific instruction catered to those needs instead of just assuming everyone needs help with decoding, looking deeper at, okay, what are the areas of need within the realm of decoding? Are they having visual miscues, semantic miscues? What's going on more deeply there? So those are informal reading inventories and their two main purposes. Bits and pieces of the IRIs, there's really just three pieces. The graded word lists, which you should have given last week. The graded reading passages, which you are giving this week. And the comprehension questions. So typically most informal reading inventories have these three pieces. A couple of them, like the developmental reading assessment or DRA, doesn't have a graded word list for you to use. They just have the passages and the comprehension questions. So the graded word list is very helpful in telling you where to start with this student, and then it's also helpful to compare later once the student gets those words in context from the graded word list to see did they get them in context and on the word list, or did they miss them on the word list and then get them in context. So it's always interesting to go back and compare performance on the word list to words in context since they are the same words there. All right, so with those graded word lists, you want to present the words individually or in the list format. You could use some sort of peekaboo folder to just orient them to one word at a time, or just show the whole list and have them point word by word. Again, begin with the list 2 years below and go up and down from there. You should have done that last week. It's always very helpful to write down the substitutions of what the student does say, so you can use that to analyze and plan from. It can be timed, untimed, or both. Consider how do you handle self-corrections and the time factor. Are you going to, give them credit for getting a self-correction, or do they need to get it right the first time? What about time? How much time are you going to give them in order to determine whether or not it was automatically recalled? All right, as far as the oral reading passages go, administration of the passage should begin at the same level where the student scored independent on the word list. If the student does poorly on the passage, you want to drop down a level until performance is satisfactory. As the student's reading, you're using a code to mark every deviation from the printed text, and we've definitely gone over how to record the miscues several times. Again, in your book on page 374, 375, they give you kind of yet another way to do that, but very similar as to what the QRI is having us do. Note that you can't always score these assessments immediately, so you kind of have to make the executive decision in the moment whether or not to stop testing. And that's another reason I'm giving you a little bit of leniency. I think 4 QRIs is a lot to give in one sitting and don't really want you to give those in one sitting. So, do as much as you can, and then if you need to finish up your third session, there's time to do that since we're talking about comprehension, and the QRI QRI is a great measure of comprehension as well. So don't feel pressured to get them all in, and obviously you're not going to be able to score them in the moment. So if you need to take time to process and then come back and for session 3, give different levels. Once you've had time to actually sit and analyze, feel free to do that as well. And then the oral reading passages can actually be used for silent reading comprehension or for listening comprehension as well. So there's actually 3 different things you can do with them. You can have the student orally read and track the miscues and calculate the words correct per minute, or you can have the student silently read and then see, what their comprehension is when they read silently versus orally. And then lastly, if your student is not able to read at any of the levels, you can always do a listening comprehension, or you could, if they're below grade level, you could give them a passage at grade level and read it to them and use it to see if they are able to access grade level text when they're read orally in that way. So there's many variations that you can use the passages for, and that's something to think about this week, is if your student does not have decoding issues, maybe you want to give the first one orally, but then from there gauge whether or not you need to give all of them orally. You could have them do a silent one as well. All right, total accuracy versus total acceptability. This is just a review of that. Keep in mind that accuracy does include self-corrections, whereas acceptability is only those meaning-changing miscues. So be very careful when you're totaling your numbers, because these percentages do impact, whether or not they're independent or instructional. So be as careful as possible with those. So pretty much you guys know how to do this. You count the errors and calculate the percentage, and then your book goes over it as well in case you need more help. Comprehension questions. After the student reads, the passage is removed and the questions are asked. Now, starting at level 3, you can have them do lookbacks, because typically when we read a text, we might not remember every single little detail, but we can typically go back and find information using our knowledge of text structures, etc., in order to find the information we need. So you may be kind of discrediting your students' comprehension skills if you don't give them that opportunity to do the lookbacks. You might actually underestimate their comprehension if you don't provide that opportunity. So remove the passage first and ask the question, and then see if maybe with a look back they could find the answer. So read the question, make sure you provide wait time. If the student doesn't respond or appears confused, you can ask the question again, possibly rephrase it. You can also ask them to tell you more. Then to score, decide if the answer is correct, incorrect, or partially correct. The QRI does not recommend giving half points, so try to avoid doing that. Also, if you're having to do a lot of prompting and rephrasing of questions, I might take a tally of how many times you're having to prompt or rephrase the question. So again, we're just talking about comprehension questions in general with informal reading inventories, not necessarily specific to the IRI or the QRI, but with the QRI, starting in level 3, pay attention to lookbacks, not lookbacks. And then once all of the questions are given, you just determine the overall percentage correct, and then the percent correct for each question type. Reading rate, so determining words per minute for silent and or oral reading. That is how you do that. And now you got to be a little careful, because Hasbrook and Tyndall is just going to be a very rough estimate, because it's really supposed to be words correct per minute. So that will not be the end all be all for words per minute. There is some room for error there if you're doing a silent reading. All right. I know that we all think the QRI and informal reading inventories are wonderful and fabulous, but there are some limitations I want to make you aware of. First of all, the representativeness of reading selections. So, performance on the IRI may or may not match performance on class materials like Basil's. There is a lot of variance from passage to passage within any IRI or the QRI. So just because the student scores independent on level 4 may not mean they can read all level 4 fourth grade materials they are presented with. There are a lot of variables within each of these passages: vocabulary, text structure, text complexity, all of those things. And it's difficult to know if passages within one grade level are comparable. So like I was just saying, even though there's 8 passages in level 4, they haven't all been controlled for all of these different things like sentence length, sentence structure, vocabulary, topic, all of those different things. And then the accuracy of the questions. Are they passage dependent? A lot of times the students can actually answer the questions even without reading the text. So that would be another limitation of measuring comprehension. So just some things to keep in mind as you're administering these IRIs and QRIs. And then some variations for you to play around with for your second and third session with your student. So again, the QRI can be used to measure silent reading comprehension, and you're welcome to try that out. You can also use it to measure listening comprehension, having you read the passage to the student and then having them answer the questions and give the retell. You can also do lookbacks, level 3 and up. Allow them to look back at the text, which I think will be a more authentic practice. And then lastly, CQRI pages 80 to 84, because at level 6 and up, you can do assessment of comprehension through Think Alouds, which I think would be a very telling way to see what kind of metacognition is going on as the student reads. And that starts at level 6 and up. So if you're giving level 6 and up, make sure you are looking to see the process for doing the think alouds. But basically at designated stopping points, you just ask the student what they're thinking about, but you need to model that practice first and then make sure you also know how to score what they're thinking about. But that's a great practice for really getting inside their head as they're reading, having them articulate what they're thinking about. All right, that's it for this week. Hopefully you feel more comfortable with fluency and the best ways to measure fluency. It's not just rate, it's also not exclusively the accuracy percentage, but all of those pieces, making sure we have a prosody indicator too. And then also little more information on informal reading inventories and QRIs. This week you will get to play a little bit more with how you're administering it, whether it be oral, silent, or listening. Think alouds, no think alouds, look backs, no look backs. So make sure that you try out some different things with those. All right, to launch you, I have this quote from Peter DeWitz and Jennifer Jones, whose article I was reading in the Marshall Memo. They said, "A child who can read but chooses not to has no particular advantage over one who cannot read." And this goes back to the fact that with these adolescent learners, motivation is so important because a lot of times they do have the skills to read, but they're just not as motivated to read. So thinking about how can you develop that within them. And then especially thinking about this session, you're going to require them to be doing a lot of reading with 3 to 4 QRIs, so making sure you're making it engaging and that the interests of the student are paramount. And yeah. All right, well, that's it for this week. Again, I'm headed out to San Antonio for the reading conference. And if you have any questions, please email me.